Thanks, Andrew. John Phil Colton, although retired, continues to be active in energy-related activities, currently participating on the Governor of Utah's Energy Council. Immediately following his retirement in 2000, he served as mission president in Cambodia, which included Vietnam, Laos, and Burma. As a United Nations and a U.S. Department of State employee, he had the chance to visit 120 countries and have contact with thousands of engineers, scientists, and diplomats. His career with the government and the UN includes positions as a senior scientist with the U.S. State Department, senior officer at the International Atomic Energy Agency, U.S. Atomic Energy Agency, and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In 2005, the IAEA Director General and staff were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to bring peace to the world. Due to his 13 years of service with the IAEA, he was one of the staff members who shared in that award and who donated their shares to humanitarian efforts in Africa. Prior to that, he worked in the private nuclear fuels industry in Idaho Falls, Idaho, St. Louis, Missouri, and New Haven, Connecticut, where nuclear fuels were manufactured for research reactors, power reactors, and Navy nuclear fuels. Colton's had an exemplary career in the U.S. Army Reserve as an officer for 37 years, serving in multiple times on active duty, the last being in Desert Storm in 1991, after which he was retired as a colonel. He attended the University of Utah for 2 years before serving in the West German mission. Returning home, he finished his studies in metallurgical engineering. Graduate work was completed at the University of Idaho, the University of Missouri, and MIT. He was born and raised in Vernal, Utah, and grew up working on the family ranch. Thomas Colton, Bobby, who he met at the University of Utah and married in 1962, reside now in Sandy, Utah. They have 4 children and 10 grandchildren. Both he and his wife act as hosts for the International Law and Religion Symposium, which is held across the bridge here at the law school each October. And he also currently serves as an advisor to the College of Physical and Mathematical Science on their Volunteer Leadership Council. It's been a number of years that I have been fortunate to know Phil, and I think the first time I officially met him was in the cafeteria of the State Department. We were working on building the International Society database, and Phil generously offered his time and expertise, having completed a similar project for the U.S. government. He seems to know everyone in the world, and he seems to know a lot about a lot of things. And so it's with great pleasure that we're able to welcome him here to the Kennedy Center today. The title for his presentation, Nuclear Non-Proliferation, the Case of Iran, is clearly a topic in the news and of great interest to many of us. And Phil has the great ability to be able to speak on an issue like this with a lifetime of experience and professional and graduate training, as well as the ability to help those of us who are non-scientists understand these really important issues. So please join me in welcoming Phil Colton.
Well, thank you very much, Corey. As you can see, I have a difficult time holding a job. I gave a lecture many years ago, the first one that I ever gave at the Institute here, and it's called Cow Herding and International Diplomacy. And I drew parallels on growing up on a ranch and working with cattle and horses and irrigation systems and things like that, and dealing in the international multilateral area of diplomacy. And there's fascinating parallels in that. Today, though, I'm actually following up on an invitation that I had a year ago. I was scheduled to be on a panel with the Syrian professor that was here, and I was looking forward to it. Unfortunately, the week before, I went in for a triple bypass, so I was unable to make it at that time, Corey. So now you're going to get the full bore. What I'd like to do today is I'd like to introduce you to a concept, perhaps. I call it Coltons Formula for threat analysis. Now, this can be used any place in life. If you're worried about something and you have to decide whether it's a threat or not, there's a simple formula for following that up. And And it's basically capability plus intent equals threat. Now, if there is no capability, in this case nuclear capability, but there's great intent, now I talked about Libya and Iran in the past and other countries, then there's no threat. If there's capability, in the case of Korea, South Korea and Japan, but no intent because they're protected under an umbrella agreement with the U.S. for their nuclear protection, then they pose no threat. If you look then at a country like Iran, and we'll be going in detail, where they are developing, not fully developed yet, the capability, but at the same time they have announced intent in the past and even currently, then in fact that's where you have to focus your resources and look at whether or not how you may be able to counter that threat. I wanted to introduce you briefly to the nuclear fuel cycle because we're going to be talking about that. Those items that will show up in red are what's called dual-use technologies. They are technologies that can be applied either to peaceful or non-peaceful purposes. Mining and milling is not a dual-use technology, but enrichment is. And of course that makes the press today in Iran, where they have done clandestine development of some enrichment technologies, violating the agreement, the treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as they have done. They have no capability at present, proven technology of fuel fabrication. They have to, on the power reactor that's being constructed right now by the Russians, the fuel will be supplied by Russia. In fact, it has been supplied. It's in Iran at the present time. They have no capability. They are learning how to do in-core fuel management to maximize the burn-up, as it's called, of the fuel. And then in the back end of the fuel cycle, some are dual use, some are not. Reprocessing, where you separate out plutonium, which is one of the items that can be used for manufacturing of nuclear devices, is in fact a dual use. It can be recycled back into the power reactors, or it can be made into a device of some sort. Storage of spent fuel, waste management. We here in Utah hear a lot about that. I might add my personal opinion, it's a bunch to do about nothing. Depleted uranium, you can practically eat it every day and live to be 90 or 95. The high-level waste, which is a problem, and eventually the disposal of spent fuel. But those have technologies that have been developed. But that's the fuel cycle. Now I'd like to show it in a pictograph. What you have is the mining, as we have in Utah, and the mills, which we have in Utah. Then they take it to a different location where they make what's called a yellow cake, or U3O8, and then from U3O8 to uranium hexafluoride, and that then goes to the enrichment facilities. This is what, again, Iran is working on, both overtly and covertly. Fuel fabrication is a step, and then following the thermal reactors, where they use it to generate heat and to generate electricity. This is the post-cycle, post-active cycle, what we call waste management steps that are here now. I want to point out the levels of enrichment, because that's a very important aspect. We have what we call highly enriched uranium, or HEU, which is used for making weapons. It's also used for research reactors, and we'll talk about how the United States supplied in the 70s to Iran highly enriched fuel to run their research reactors. And that is a definition. We can't say today whether that's weapons-grade material, but at least in order to make a nuclear device, you have to actually go higher than 20% to be a threat. Okay, low-enriched uranium is less than 20%, and it is used primarily for light water reactors. Now, light water reactors has essentially between 3 and 5% enrichment. Now, I'm not going to get into the details, but uranium, as you mill it in the ground, only has a fraction of 1% U-235, or actually uranium in it, and of that, a very small percent is this isotope, which is the isotope that will fission. The U-238, or depleted uranium, most of it, does not have the capability of fissioning. And most of the power reactors in the world use this low-enriched uranium. And then slightly enriched uranium, there are some special uses for that as well. Depleted is, obviously, you've removed the U-235. I wanted, again, just to give you a brief overview of what a nuclear reactor looks like. The reactor core is here, and that's usually formed by U-235 in a form of uranium dioxide contained, and the water flows past it when it's fissioning, and it gives heat, and that heat goes through a heat exchanger where it's converted to steam, and that steam then just goes over into a turbine generating of electricity. There are other cooling systems that take place there. There was a good article today about Green River, Utah. They had an election, and the majority voted for having a nuclear power plant down there because it would bring in high-paid 1,000 new employment jobs during the construction, over 5,000 people. And then it will generate really minimum impact energy on carbon footprint that you hear so much about. I'm sorry, this is a separate discussion that could take all hour, but I want to get into the uranium situation. Plutonium is a metal. It's a radioactive metal. It is the element used for most nuclear weapons today. And it's not just, there are different isotopes of plutonium. And there are certain isotopes that are more effective in nuclear weapons than others. The one that is used, that is the highest radioactivity or sensitivity, is plutonium-239. Now, I'm going to show you secrets, actually. This is from Wikipedia, so this is really not secrets. But there are two types of explosive devices, and as we discuss the various types of material, I want you to understand. The old original traditional weapon was a gun-type assembly. It was like a gun barrel, and they had two what they called half-critical spheres, and then the conventional explosives would drive these two together so that it would stay long enough that you would have the non-contained explosion that would take place by the supercriticality. The second one is a plutonium device. This is a fission type of device. This is a fusion type device. And what takes place, again, conventional explosives are located around a sphere of plutonium. It compresses it momentarily and causes the explosion to take place. Now, again, my reference for this is there, so there's no secret. So, Colonel, you don't need to take that information home. You're a colonel, right?
No, I'm a cadet, sir.
You're a cadet. Oh, you just have the colonel button on.
No, it's a dot.
Oh, it's a dot. Okay. Being the military type, when I see a black dot, that's usually a lieutenant colonel, and I thought you're pretty young. But anyhow, congratulations on supporting our country. Now I want to bring in the issue of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because it's very critical in the status that we see Iran today. The landmark treaty of all types in the weapons control is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The intent is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, to promote peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and look at disarmament. So the countries, and I'll define them here in a minute, that have nuclear weapons have promised that they will reduce their inventory. Those that are members to or party to the treaty say that if you give us technology, allow us access to technology for peaceful purposes, we will allow your inspectors, this is now the tie-in with the International Atomic Energy Agency where I worked for 13 years. If you do that, we will allow your inspectors to come in and inspect our facilities and prove that we are doing it properly. Now, there are currently 189 members that are party to the treaty. Cuba was the most recent that they are. They're divided into nuclear weapon states. There's only 5 that are recognized in the NPT. That's U.S., France, Russia, England, and China. The non-nuclear weapon states are all the rest. In 1968-1970 timeframe, it came into existence. It is the most sizable functional treaty of this type in the world today. There are review conferences held every 5 years where reporting are given on the disarmament by those party to that have weapons. And those that are getting technical assistance. My area of expertise was always reviewing the support by the developed countries to the developing countries in the area of technical assistance. So that gets another discussion. They also, the safeguards or the inspection that the member states agreed to is through the International Atomic Energy Agency, and we'll talk about that briefly. The peaceful transfers of technologies through both bilateral, you will recall, those that are older, will recall the Atoms for Peace program that was under Eisenhower, where we actually spread research reactors throughout the world to over 50 countries, allowing them to have information to run those. And of course, most used it properly, others did not. And then through multilateral means. There's $100 million a year that the International Atomic Energy Agency distributes through training programs, through consultants, and through equipment, usually not related to nuclear energy, because most developing countries use it for agriculture, isotope application, medicine, nuclear medicine, and oncology for cancer control and so forth. That's done through the IAEA and others like that, Euratom. Now here's a pictorial of the nuclear weapon countries of the world. The nuclear proliferation weapon states, as I mentioned, are there in blue. The non-nuclear weapon states, non-NPT. Now, they do not belong to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they are nuclear weapon states recognized. India, Pakistan, and most recently, North Korea. And those are the reds ones. The undeclared nuclear weapon state is Israel, and that we'll talk about because of the influence that perceived threat has in the particular region, the Middle East area. And then states of having nuclear weapons programs. These are Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And we're talking about recent in the last 8 years. NATO weapons sharing states where we supply those that are members of NATO protection under various agreements. And finally, the green is the states formally possessing nuclear weapons. I'll talk a little bit about South Africa because they made the ultimate sacrifice. Of course, they were caught with nuclear devices, and they, with the transition of their government, gave them all up. I actually, in my office in the IAEA in Vienna, I had a plowshare made from part of a nuclear weapon device, not uranium or plutonium, but some of the other material that goes into housing that. They had made a plowshare going back to the Old Testament approach. Now, I want to briefly, this is one that I just added this morning because I think it is important to point out the successes and the failures of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And again, this all relates to Iran as we go into that. In the 1960s, Kennedy forecasted there would be 20 to 30 nuclear weapon states by year 2000. Okay? In 2010, there were 9. So you see that something has occurred to suppress the projection to a very lower level. In Korea, North Korea, it could be 8 because North Korea did something very dastardly. The 4 gave up nuclear weapons. South Africa, the Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus gave up thousands of weapons, of nuclear weapons. Moved them out of their country, gave them back to Russia in the case of these. I don't know what South Africa did with theirs, but they did something with it. 4 plus, and I say plus because there are others that you would be surprised at that had nuclear weapons programs at one time. But South Korea, Taiwan, Argentina, and Brazil all had nuclear weapon programs that are documented. There are others that are not documented that had various levels of. Why Argentina, Brazil? Because they hated one another, the tensions of the region. Okay? Well, then you might suspect that Chile might have been in there because they had an admiral as a president. So, you can sort of project why Taiwan? Because China had nuclear devices. South Korea, because of North Korea development. So those were some of the successes and failures. Holdouts, these never signed. Now these countries never signed the NPT. And why? Because they felt that it was not fair that some countries had nuclear devices and they weren't allowed to do it. India and Pakistan, why did they develop nuclear devices? Because of the tensions in the region. Okay? Israel, because of tensions in the region. Okay? North Korea developed it and then they quit the NPT. See, there's a mechanism by which you can resign. But by resigning, you lose access to this technical cooperation. You lose access to a lot of different things. There are those who violated their NPT commitments. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, all had signed the NPT. They promised that they would only use it for peaceful purposes, and they promised that they would allow inspectors to come in to their countries and document that it's being used for peaceful purposes. Now, again, you have to bring in the IAEA. This was my office for 9 of the 13 years that I was there. We were over on the Main Street for another 5 years. But their purpose is, in fact, it was organized under the Atoms for Peace, sponsored and pushed by the United States in 1957 to be a specialized agency within the United Nations. It works with member states, multiple partners. In the case of the U.S., it's Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and others. In 2005, as was mentioned, the work that we did there was recognized by the Nobel Commission, and we were awarded. I might say that, I don't know if you've had a Nobel Peace Prize winner here before, Corey, or not, but half of it went to the Director General, Dr. El-Baradi, and half went to the staff, probably around 3,000 of us that were recognized and given a small thing. And so if you divide whatever it was, we decided all to contribute it to humanitarian purposes in Africa. So, but nevertheless, the work that the IAEA did in support of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the inspection was highly recognized. There are three pillars of the IAEA. The first is to promote safeguards and verification. That's to do what the NPT says that will be done. A country allows inspectors to come in, and they do it. And we're going to again, this all ties into Iran's case. One thing that's not known throughout the world is that I wrote many safety standards for fuel cycle activities. I convened committees, and we wrote down the safety standards that would allow safe operations of isotope producing and manufacturing facilities. And then my last assignment over there actually was in the technical cooperation. So I was responsible for a part of my time there for that $100 million distribution amongst 100 countries. As an example, you know how it is for internships. Well, I had the responsibility of selecting, placing, and funding 16,000 foreign scientists, usually doctors or professors, physics professors and so forth, in those applications each year in 9 different languages. So we'd take 100 countries and send them to 40 different countries. Well, the LDS missionary program doesn't really hold a candle to the effort that we had to put forth. But anyhow, it's a meaningful and important one. This is the IAEA, this is the Director General. My first 5 years was over in nuclear fuel cycle and waste technology. The last 9 years basically was in this planning and coordination area. I was the director of this particular division. These are the support elements for the safeguards. That's the inspectors that go out. These are specialized developments. There they develop techniques for, I saw rice that were made through mutations to have a straw only about 3 inches high. So areas that have limited water can still raise rice, but they don't take as much water to produce it. I wanted to use this to just refresh again, because now we're into Iran. This is again the fuel cycle chart that you saw earlier, and going from the mines through the various steps to use in the reactors, and then the waste that is produced from that. So let's talk. Remember the formula I gave you to start out with? Capability plus intent is equal to a threat. So let's talk about their capability. In the Atoms for Peace program, the U.S. supplied a research reactor in 1968. A 5 megawatt thermal is quite a powerful reactor, and used what we call fully enriched uranium. Fully enriched is, it's not classified, it's above 90% enriched. And certainly you can make weapons from that, okay? So we gave to them in good faith the capability, if they wanted to extract that out, if they at the same time developed the capability to make nuclear devices at that time. Now the Shah was the head of the government at that time. And at that time, in 1970, they signed an agreement for 20 power reactors. Here in the United States, I think we're at about 120. But that's about, that's 80% of the power needs for the country of Iran. And we would supply the enriched fuel. See, we didn't want them to start enriching fuel. The United States would supply the enriched fuel. Germany supplied the reactors, so we would supply the fuel for that. And in fact, Germany started building the first 2 reactors at Bushehr. That's a name that you hear frequently. Bushehr, and then of course the overthrow of the Shah took place, and the Iran war. Who's our specialists in Mesa? I think it was about from 79 to 85.
It was 80 to 88.
Yeah, what was it?
I think it was from 1980 to 1988.
Yeah, it was in that time frame, the first part of the 80s. And Iraq thought that they were developing nuclear weapon devices. Of course, these were just shells, they were concrete. So they attempted to put some missiles in. One, it chipped it a little bit, but it didn't break the containment, as we call it, the safety containment. And so then they flew in from the other side, the Iraqis did, with U.S. equipment and missiles, and tried to drop it through an unfinished portion of it. And so some of the munitions went in and bounced around and did some damage, but the reactor wasn't finished. It wasn't the pressure vessel, which is that component that I showed you initially, wasn't even installed. But anyhow, in 1978, the Shah, the Ayatollah, stopped all technical development. We don't want any Western technology. We don't need any Western technology. But then they decided, oh, well, we've got quite an infrastructure there. We have hundreds. Many of my good friends are Iranians that are getting their doctorate at MIT and London, and maybe some of you professors that are here knew Iranians that were out in the marketplace, because that's what they had to develop. They were building a massive industry, and so they had to use them. Contracts were in place. Bushehr plant was about 60% complete. One of my friends that worked for the IAEA said, "You Americans think you stopped us." But in reality, I was in charge of an office in Germany that went out to find pressure vessels on the market, because a lot of reactors had shut down. And we located them, but then the U.S. found out we were doing it, and they stopped the transport and so forth. So, you know, there were a lot of things going on at that time, and they felt, of course, Iran felt that they needed to develop the capability for energy development. Now, I believe fully, initially the intent was to meet that need. This Bushehr, you have to recognize, Bushehr is located right on that little peninsula that's right there. And Bushehr has no water. They pump 125 miles through an 8-foot line irrigation to have that as an agricultural area. It's a very rich area. And so the Japanese were going to use a third of the power from the nuclear power station to desalinate water and use that for water. So there's a great need in that particular area. Okay, in 1992, while I was working for the IAEA, the Russians and Iranians came in and started talking about a reduced plan, but they would start out by finishing Bushehr. And Bushehr should start up in the next 12 months. That reactor, the fuel's there, basically they've completed all the preliminary work, it will start up. And 2 research reactors. Now, 2 research reactors are critical because they want high enriched fuel in order to run those research reactors so that they can be more powerful. Well, that's their justification for going into the enrichment process, is nobody's going to sell us high enriched uranium. We want to develop our own, not for weapons. We want to develop it for research reactors. So the justification is actually there. Russia actually has supplied the first load and reloads in the last 3 months. They've been flown in at night in big transports. And usually, this is just a simple note, a 15 to 20 gigawatt electrical justifies the economic that you have the full fuel cycle. So if indeed they are going to develop a plan that will bring that much electricity into it, then indeed they have a justifiable argument for developing all phases. Now, they shouldn't do it clandestinely. They have an NPT agreement. NPT says you're going to let what? Inspectors come in and inspect all your facilities. Well, they violated that. And QOR, I don't know how you pronounce it, but COR is one of their clandestine areas where they were making high-enriched uranium. But the IAEA in 2003, for the very first time, to my knowledge, declared that Iran had closed the fuel cycle and they had these capabilities. Later on, El-Baradei, oh, there we go, I think. said this statement: "We are unable to provide the required assurance about the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program." That was significant. The first time in the history of the IAEA that they made this strong a statement. North Korea actually backed out. They quit the NPT and the IAEA before such time as this statement was made, although it could have been made for them as well. Anyhow, however, the obligations under the NPT were not met. Suspicions arose about peaceful / non-peaceful intent. And then 2006, the claims of enrichment. Now, keep in mind, these inspectors are not dumb. And they have all sorts of technology, even access to some of the Western technology. They fly airplanes over the air, and they can pick up particulates, micro particulates. And they can tell exactly what type of fuel cycle activity is going on. So they have access to that. And trying to hide that is not very easy at all. So the fact that they signed up to the NPT said that they would agree to it, and when they didn't agree to it, then you had problems. They initially ratified the nuclear non-proliferation, one of the very first ones, 1970. Now, I just want to throw this in because I saw outside you had Pakistan, friend or foe. Munir Khan, this A.Q. Khan, as he calls himself, was a real dastardly guy. He went to Germany and got his doctorate, and then he stayed there and became Eurodef, an enrichment technology developed in Europe that was not classified militarily, it was classified commercially. He went in there, became an employee. He copied all of the technology. Where did Pakistan get the technology to do the enrichment, to develop the weapons that they did? From Khan. Okay? In 2003, he confessed. You know, the pressure from the U.S. on Pakistan got him to confess that he had done these dastardly things. And he, at the same time, said, hey, I helped Iran. I helped Iraq as well. So the influence, and this was sheer money that drove him into that. It wasn't any, what would you call it, political hatred for the West or anything like that. He just got lots of money. Anyhow, so now what we see is all of a sudden, Pakistan has developed a weapon of some sort. Israel has some of some sort, undeclared, unadmitted, and now Iraq actually, you recall, they had a research reactor that they were building, and it turned out underneath the research reactor, they were building reprocessing capability. So down at lower levels on this reactor that they were doing, they were building the capability for extracting plutonium. Well, what happened? Israel got a little impatient. They went in and took out that research reactor before it went critical, so there was no spread of radiation, and they destroyed that capability. And so the whole argument of whether the U.S. was justifiable going into Iraq or not, because they had the capability. They had the capability. They may not have had the material at the time, but they had the knowledge. Saudi Arabia, they're very worried about Israel, of course, but even more so, they're worried about Iran. So regional tensions are starting to build up. So what's the tendency? The tendency is to develop their own capabilities. So in 1992, Iran claims that the IAEA can inspect all the nuclear facilities. But in reality, and before 2003, based upon that statement I gave earlier, there was no violations detected. But then in 2007, Bashar made that statement, unable to provide the required assurance. Now, what's interesting is the IAEA has no army. It can't go in and attack Iran for not going that. All they can do is report to the Security Council, the UN Security Council, that this is the situation, that indeed we cannot assure that they aren't doing something wrong. And then the Security Council, through the UN, can perform sanctions. Sanctions meaning limiting all technology, limiting material, funds flow, all those types of things. So keep in mind, capability plus intent equals a threat. So we've seen the development of the capability, some justifiable on the part of Iran, some done clandestinely. The intent is very clear, it's been there. So what are the next steps? And I don't know the answer to this. I used to be the policymaker in the State Department that had North Korea and Iran in some, we called them the Dirty Dozen. They were the countries that were doing things clandestinely and so forth. So some of the options is international sanctions. Historically, that doesn't bring about a great deal. But as an example, North Korea has many, many sanctions going on now, and you see that they're at a compromise level. They're prepared to, if you remove the sanctions, then we will stop doing this, now that we have the devices. Russia only agreed to Iran's because they were a member of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nobody of the weapon countries will sell a nuclear power plant project unless they are clean. So they are not clean. So theoretically, Russia has an argument to stop all work on the nuclear power plant. They've invested $2 or $3 billion. We have even, I happen to be a person that believes negotiations, discussions should take place. And that was my policy back under the prior administrations. Current one, my former boss is a guy named John Bolton. He's now ambassador at large, I think, for the Middle East. And he was never approved, but ambassador to the UN also. He's a brilliant guy, but he doesn't have common sense to that. As much as that guy that runs his cattle up on our range and used to break down the fence and push the cattle through. So he doesn't have that kind of common sense. Anyhow, but we could go ahead, and I think so. Membership of the NPT, it is precarious. If they were to back out of the NPT, that would bring a lot of pressure on other countries saying, hey, look, if you can develop a weapon and then back out and have the protection up until that time, what is there for us to stay involved in the NPT? So it could bring about a disassembly of the NPT. The regional tensions, there's been demonstrations before. Syria developed a clandestine research reactor. What did Israel do? They bombed it. They took it out. Iraq did the same thing. What happened? I'm not sure. Saudi Arabia is terrified of nuclear tensions in the area. So I don't know what the solution is, but I'm just trying to point out in these few minutes what I believe the cause of the position that Iran is in today, and some of the influences of the region that's taking place. So I want to thank you for your attention. I do have a few, I snapped a few shots around here. Actually, we used to have the Cambodian families come into my office, and I would give a lecture on the international church. And so I just have a few pictures I wanted to share with you of the attentiveness and I noticed that some of you is too warm in here, Corey. You need to drop the temperature. But I hope that you enjoy these, and I will open the discussions for questions. We have maybe 5 minutes before people have to head out for the classes. I think this is my favorite. And yeah, I can tell you many stories about that. But anyhow, thanks a lot.
Since our system is still being upgraded, we don't have the wireless mic. So if you have a question, stand up, introduce yourself, and then we'll just restate the question behind the podium, if that's okay.
Please.
My name is Sean Guerrero. I'm an international relations major. And my question is, recently I've heard a lot of individuals advocate kind of going back to the mad-like deterrence against Iran. They say, go ahead, let Iran get nuclear weapons. We'll just practice classic deterrence and go back to the MAD doctrine. In your estimation, is that a viable option or plan for the United States?
The question is whether or not allowing Iran to go ahead and proceed openly with the development of nuclear devices, is that a proper thing? Well, what I attempted to show here is that the level of anxiety by neighbors will force proliferation, either in deterrence, their capability to fly in with, bunker busters, what are they called? Anyhow, big bombs to blow up caves and things like that. I think it's not a realistic one. I think we need to keep trying to do the discussions and bring sanctions and supply. Actually, one of the options is the U.S. has offered to supply enrichment technology to, not enriched fuel to Iran to meet all of their fuel needs. Please.
President Colton, thank you. My name is Brad Masters.
By the way, he served in Cambodia, so he's a good man.
Iran's population is overwhelmingly young. And in a recent article in Foreign Affairs, Brzezinski, I think he spoke last night, advocated that in these discussions, the United States needs to consider the fact that historically Iran has been a long-time ally of the United States and that potentially could return to an ally status. How do you think that consideration needs to be reflected in our approach with Iran?
Thank you. Did you hear the question? The question was basically with the youth, the predominant youth percentage in Iran, can we return to a friendship basis? I was invited by the ambassador in Vienna to be the first American returning to Iran under an American passport in 1994-95, since the overthrow of the government in '79. And I traveled throughout. They wanted me to come back saying, Iran's not proliferating. Now, I was not an inspector. I was there actually for a different purpose. But everywhere I went, I mean, the Hilton Hotel is where they put me up in Tehran. And there were brass alphabet characters up above it. It said, "Down with USA." That was the greeting that I had. And then written on some walls as they took me to some of their institute was USA, mother of all whores. And I mean, there were sort of, nasty things. And I was having breakfast one day, and one of these young couples were sitting there with their kids having breakfast as well. They came over and said, "Are you an American?" I don't know what it said at all. But I said, "Yes." He says, "We love America." And there is no doubt about it. The technical people that I dealt with, not the policy-making people that are quite radical, they know the value of sanctions. If they had sanctions removed, the billions of dollars that they have to redo in technology development would not have to be spent. So I think that if we maintain discussions and start discussions, but there's a lot of pressure. Israel, though not a member of the NPT, I said in these 5-year conferences for, I guess, 4 different conferences, 20 years I was there. And the ambassador from Israel, who wasn't supposed to be there, sat right behind the U.S. delegation. And he funneled messages up through me to our ambassador. And finally I got approval by the ambassador, and I went back and I said, "Look, I don't want to get another message from you at all in view of the people that are here. You want to talk to me? Talk to me on a break. That's fine. But don't be seen passing notes to me, because why? We're manipulating the U.S. government in the eyes of everybody that was there. They are not even a member of the NPT. They have developed nuclear weapons. All these things take place. So discussions are critical. And I think there is some movement, but the danger of movement in radical governments are fraught with danger as well. Tiananmen Square and so forth. You've got to move at a certain pace. And you hope that the technology's not, capability's not advancing faster than the discussions. Thanks. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate your attendance. We ended up filling it up, Corey. We didn't have standing. Oh, we do have standing. Jeff's back there, so Dr. Inger is back there. So. Anyhow, thanks for coming out. Especially want to thank my wife. My son's a physics professor over in the college, and his wife, my very favorite daughter-in-law. And then I had 2 nephews that showed up, too, that are studying students here. So that was great. And who?
And the granddaughter.
Oh, Kylie's back there. Oh, you told me you had a class, Kylie. Okay, so anyhow, thanks for coming. I hope it's been helpful for you.